Hello and welcome to the second video in putting INAV on this thing here. Now this is the Skull V3. If you haven't watched the first video in the series, that one covers the hardware changes and also why you might want INAV. But before we kind of get into the software setup on this, now the hardware is all done, let me show you what this kind of stuff looks like. Now in INAV there are lots of additional GPS modes. There is things like the nav hold, which will keep it in 3D space. Very good for essentially parking the quadcopter in the air. Also handy if you want to do things like filming or do some video from the quad. It will kind of keep it more or less in the same spot. It will wander around a little bit, up to about 6 feet 2 meters, but it will do its very best. And there's a couple of tips and tricks to make that work better, and I'll cover those in this video. The second big benefit of INAV, of course, is that it has the return to home. And when return to home is initiated, it'll face towards you, which is great if you're ever flying and lose your orientation of where you're stood in the field that you're in. But it flies back to you, hovers over the position it was armed, and then rotates into the same orientation it was in when it was armed first time, gently descends, lands in the grass, and when it figures out it's on the ground, it will cut the motors. So if that's something you're interested in, then let's carry on. Let me plug this into the computer and show you all the steps I've gone through to get this working on INAV. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure the props are off, and we need to power the quadcopter from the battery. Now the reason we're doing that is because we want the compass and GPS to be powered up so that they can be configured and read. And then plug it into your computer and click connect. Now this is all working, but I will take you through each of the steps. Now the easiest way to do it is kind of work from the top and go all the way down, and by the time you get to the bottom everything's going to be working fine. When you first come in here, these won't all be blue. This is where you want to end up, with all of these sensors being blue: gyro, accelerometer, magnetometer, baro and GPS. The barometer works better if you cover it with a little bit of foam, and the magnetometer works better when you keep it as far away as possible from other electronics, and we're going to have to do a calibration for that. Now at the end of the process, you're aiming to not only have all this stuff nice and blue, which means it's working, but have all this stuff here nice and green, because if any of this is red, it will not arm. And having the props off is a safety feature, but the very last things you're going to do is go into configuration and enable your motor and servo outputs, because until that's enabled, nothing will burst into life. But let me go through how I'm going to do it. First of all, in setup, just make sure that the quad is the right way round. As you lift the nose up, make sure that it's the nose on the little icon here, the little green arrow, is moving up as well. If it's not, then we're going to have to change the board alignment. Second job is to go into calibration and click on calibrate accelerometer and put the quad in each of the 6 positions shown. Click next each time, and when it's finished you'll have all of these ticked. Click save and reboot and come back in. Then the next job is to calibrate the compass. If the compass hasn't appeared, then go into configuration, and then here where it says magnetometer, which is just a fancy word for compass, just click it to auto, save and reboot, and it should find it. Then come back into calibration, click calibrate compass. It'll count down and give you 30 seconds, and in that time move the model around, ideally away from any large metal objects or any other magnets. And what you're aiming for is when it's finished, you can go back into setup, and by picking the nose up and down, the quadcopter isn't rapidly rotating like that. If it is, then the orientation of the compass is the wrong way round. Now interestingly, in mine, in the configuration, I had to change my mag alignment on this particular compass I'm using to counterclockwise 270-degree flip, and then go through the calibration again for it to all work and for it to all be spot on. But if you've got any weird behaviors here where once you've done the compass, picking the nose up and down makes this little virtual model flip around crazily, that's going to be the problem. Next job then is the mixer. Now I would skip this one and just go onto presets and click the preset that you're interested in. Now I've gone for 5-inch GPS. Click it and apply, and it will do the majority of the configuration work for you, which is great. Then once it's rebooted, come back in and we can start to then set up the ports as per what we had in Betaflight. And if you remember the original view, this is kind of what we had. So the GPS is plugged into UART1, TBS Smart Audio is UART5, we have Smart Port in UART3, and in the next video I'll probably do a quick video showing you how to use the Lua script on the radio to kind of monitor the flight easily. But once that's all done, save and reboot again. Now hopefully by this point things are starting to turn blue at the top, and we spend a little bit of time in configuration. Again, barometer might not have been picked up automatically. If it isn't here and it isn't blue, just come down here, click auto, save and reboot, and it'll find it. You'll notice here that by default it has selected 1-shot 125. If you select D-shot for anything in INAV, then it tends to get a little bit upset. So D-shot's 300 is the least one, but 1-shot 125 is working fine on this setup I've got. Set it up for S-Bus, do all of the things. It's good. It will warn you when you're doing something crazy. So just follow the basics. Turn on the GPS, keep it as U-blocks, set it to auto detect, and then that should be most of the stuff done in here. Now I've set the power levels here for Fat Shark, the band and everything else. I've also set up the current sensor and the battery voltage to mirror what's in Betaflight. It's in here, it's in a slightly different place, but the settings are the same. Again, click save and reboot, and this time when it comes up, you should now have a GPS appearing because it'll auto configure it, barometer, mag, accelerometer and gyro, and everything should start to go nice and blue. The GPS initially is probably going to be red, but once it starts to boot up and get signals from satellites, it'll go blue. Next job is set the failsafe. I would always set it for return to home because that's kind of the whole point. PID tuning, leave that alone. In the receiver tab, exactly the same as in Betaflight. So make sure your channel map is the same. So when you move the throttle moves on the screen here. Set all the middle channel values for 1500. Set yourself with a 3-position switch for the modes, and set yourself an arming switch as well. Go into mode tab, exactly the same as previous versions of the Betaflight configurator. Give yourself an arm switch. I would recommend having angle set up, and then I would also have nav position hold and nav return to home. This is how it was configured in the video that you've just seen. And that's all I've really got set up. You don't have to do all these altitude hold and everything else. These kind of do it for you. Spend a bit of time with the on-screen display. The on-screen display is an awful lot more complete here. We have directional roses, we have direction to home arrows and distances, we have H-dot numbers. This is how I have it laid out. So I've got my altitude, my miles per hour, the scale. I also have something called radar turned on in here. You can pick radar here at the bottom, and that shows me where my home position is and where I am relative to home, so I can kind of see in the OSD exactly where I am. Pro tip in here is do go into Font Manager and upload the default font. You'll probably find that the one that was on it with Betaflight will give you some weird and wacky stuff. It won't look as clean as this. Some of these weird other characters will not be happy. There are a couple of last little tweaks that you can do here to make it better. If you know where the hover point is, go into the receiver, put your stick at the position on the radio that you need for hover, make a note of what the value is. This is 1245 in this example. Go into the CLI and you want to set something called the nav underscore multicopter underscore hover underscore throttle.
Sensor lost. Sensor lost.
And then what you need to do is to set that value to whatever the hover value is, and that way when you pop it into the nav hold position, then it won't immediately rise and sink. It'll very quickly figure it out, but that's just telling it where the hover value is. I'd probably put it slightly above where you think it's going to be, kind of 5 or 6 above. So rather than 1280, put 1286, because as the battery starts to discharge, obviously there's less power available for the motors, and that's typically where you're going to be using those kind of modes. There are a couple of other things it's worthwhile looking at in here. So just go through and check all the fail-safe settings to make sure that you're completely happy. And the other things that I would also have a look at in here, which can be quite handy, is also look at the nav RT settings. just so that you are clear about what all those are. Again, all that stuff is covered in the manual, but I didn't change any of it. I'm using it as the defaults are, which are set by INAV and also by picking out the preset. So to fly the thing and actually test it, there's a couple of things that you need to do. Do double check that it's all moving right in the CLI before you go and fly. Also make sure that when you point your quadcopter north, it's more or less pointing north, and it does that consistently. If those two things are wrong, then it's all going to be a disaster. Very last thing you do is go into configuration, enable your outputs, and then you are good to go. Now, in terms of the first test flights, I would go somewhere nice and open, take off in angle mode, just fly around, just make sure everything is okay. Once you're happy with that, flick it into nav position hold and see how well it works. It shouldn't be wandering around too much. Again, it'll wander anything up to 2 meters 6 feet, and that's perfectly normal, but I would park it kind of 4 or 5 meters in the air and just see how it handles itself. If it's sinking, then you probably need to increase that throttle value that we looked at in the CLI. If it's rising, it probably needs to be decreased slightly. Once you're comfortable that that works consistently and everything is happy, then the final test is to start nav return to home. Fly a little bit further away, make sure it's not too far away in case something wacky happens, and then stick it into nav return to home and it should fly back to you. The key with INAV is to make sure that you have a nice 3D position hold, and the H-stop is below 2.0. That's why I put those in the on-screen display, because that GPS will lock the position of home, and actually these later versions of INAV won't let you arm the quadcopter if there is anything wrong with the navigation, which is a great safety feature. But those are the ways that I set something like this up. If you follow that process, then it's time to explore and have fun. Once you've gone through a couple of these return to home and loiters, then you'll find that INAV is a great companion and really handy for those times where you want a quadcopter, where you have an oh dear switch that does everything. Doesn't just fly it back to you, but actually securely flies it back to you and lands safely too. Thanks for watching the video and watching right to the very end. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you like the video and like what I'm doing here, then hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon too. If you really like what I'm doing, you can go the extra mile and become one of my Patreons for access to me directly for support, and also giveaways and regular updates too. If you're looking for particular content, then check out the playlist. I organise all of my videos into playlists, so if you're looking for a particular topic, you can find everything here. If it's called Introduction To, it's designed to start very simply and build on that simple introduction to teach you all about it. If it's called For Beginners, then that is really aimed at people who are brand new to that part of the hobby. You can also search on YouTube for anything that you're interested in using the search function at the top. So INAV Painless 360 will find all of my videos and even the playlists around INAV. So thanks again for watching and happy flying.